If you have a question for Dr. Donna, please do leave it on my page and I will be happy to answer the question for you. 6:30-ish, and you have an appointment with your doctor, Talking with Dr. Donna. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Sorry we're a little bit late. We always have a little bit of technical difficulties when you're going live. So thank you for your patience. Tonight we have an awesome show. I am so excited to have my friend, Dr. Sophia Yin here. She is an adolescent medicine physician as well as a professor at Stanford University, and I'm going to let her really do a great job of introducing herself. But before we get to Dr. Yin, I want to just remind you that this is Talking with Dr. Donna, and my goal is to build generational health. And what is that? Generational health is where I'm thinking about you, your generation, you, right where you are, to build your physical health, your spiritual health, your emotional health, right, and our environmental health. And now if we concentrate on these 4 aspects of health, we should be able to end the premature cycle of death in our communities. So thank you for tuning in. This is Black History Month. February is Black History Month. We know we do Black History 365, but this is the month where we really want to highlight those who came before us. So someone that I want to highlight today in our Black History Month is W.E.B. Du Bois, because I think that this is so important as we move into talking about women's health, that we also talk about Dr. Du Bois. So he was a sociologist, a historian, an author. One of my favorite books is a book that he authored called The Souls of Black Folk. And in that book, he talked about Black Americans having a double consciousness. So I'm going to read just a little bit from that book, and then you're going to see why I think it's important to do it on the night that we're talking about women's health. So W.E.B. Du Bois said, "It is a peculiar sensation, this double consciousness, this sense of always looking at oneself through the eyes of others, of measuring one's soul by the tape of a world that looks on in amused contempt and pity. One ever feels his two-ness, right? Being an American and being a Negro. 2 souls, 2 thoughts, 2 unreconciled strivings, 2 warring ideals in one dark body, whose dogged strength alone keeps it from being torn asunder." As Blacks in America, we have this double consciousness of being Black and being American. As a woman in America, I challenge us to say that as women, we have a triple consciousness, building off of what Mr. Du Bois said. We have the being American, we have being Black, and we have being a woman, which comes with a completely additional set of issues, thoughts, and warring of our consciousness. So I want to pay homage to author, sociologist, historian, civil rights activist, W.E.B. Du Bois on this Black History moment here on Talking with Dr. Donna. So now I want to bring in our guest, Dr. Sophia Yin. Dr. Yin, are you there?
Yes. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. It's so awesome to see you. I have known Dr. Yin for a long time. We did residency together at Children's Hospital Oakland. And then I did a brief stint, only a year of adolescent medicine fellowship together at UCSF. And we have been friends, and I foresee us being friends forever. So thank you, Dr. Yin, for being on Talking with Dr. Donna.
Thank you so much for having me here. So I just wanted to give a little background of how I got to where I am today.
Yes.
I grew up in the Bay Area, went to MIT, went to UC San Francisco Medical School, and then went to Children's Oakland to specialize in pediatrics. And that's where you and I met. And then I recruited you to follow me to UCSF for adolescent medicine.
Yes.
And then went back to UC Berkeley to do a master's in public health and maternal child health, specializing in obesity, and then ended up at Stanford as a clinical associate professor in the Department of Pediatrics in the Division of Adolescent Medicine. And then about 5 years ago almost started Pandia Health, the only women-founded, women-led, doctor-led company in birth control delivery. And so I'm passionate about women's health and talking about periods and making periods optional and birth control and just women's health.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Yin. So yes, I'm so excited. We're going to talk about all of that tonight. We're going to talk about Pandia Health. We're going to talk about periods optional. But before we get into that, I think it's important that we set what is your menstrual cycle, right? You have daughters, I have a daughter, and it's always interesting to me on how you have this conversation with your daughters about their menstrual cycle, and about what is their menstrual cycle. So can you take us through that? Like, why? What is the menstrual cycle? How does it work? Like, can you take us through that?
If we could pull up that first slide, I think it would be helpful.
Yes, the slide with all the nice little pictures and
hormones up and down, the stuff that we have nightmares about.
Yes, absolutely.
So for everybody looking, you don't have to memorize all these pieces, but you can see on the bottom, from the medical side, we call day 0 of your 28 to 35 day cycle the day you begin bleeding. And so you see on the bottom that it's shedding the lining of the uterus. And then to grow the lining of the uterus. And then on day 13, so 14 days after the first day of your bleed, the egg pops out. And that's called ovulation. And it comes out of your ovary. And then if it doesn't get fertilized in about 7 more days, the body's like, oh, no baby. And so it drops the hormone and then you bleed. And so that is the cycle. It happens around age 12 or 2 years after you get your first breast buds, or 6 months after you get some white discharge that happens on your panty. So if you start getting some white discharge in your panty, about 6 months later is when your period's going to happen. And one of the number one questions I get is, I started my periods, they're irregular, when should they be regular? And for some people, it's immediately regular. For some people, it takes up to 2 years to be irregular after that first period. And that first period is called menarche. And then relevant to today is coronavirus and what is its effect on your periods. And the top reasons for irregular period, 1 is you're young and you're within that first 2 years. Number 2, pregnancy, but that's only if you've had vaginal heterosexual relations. And then number 3, I would say stress. And thanks to coronavirus, we are in so much mental stress from dealing with being at home with our family members, missing school, not being able to do the things that we enjoy doing. And then the other causes are polycystic ovarian syndrome, which affects like 1 in 10 women. So if your periods are irregular, you're hairy, and you have some acne. And then the thyroid is a cause, nutrition is a cause, either too much or too little. So those are the top reasons why your period may go irregular.
Great. And I just want to highlight a couple of things that you said, because you said a lot there, and a lot of it is really important. One of the things that you said is that it can take up to 2 years after you have your first cycle or your first time that you bleed. It can take up to 2 years to become regular. And by regular, we mean having a period every single month. And so that's important because, it's kind of stressful. Like you have a period and then you don't have it, then you have it again, and then you might go 2 months and not have it. So to know that that is normal for like the first 2 years, I think is is a lifesaver for our kids. The other thing that you said is right now, in the midst of coronavirus, that kids are stressed, right? Our young ladies are stressed. And so that might impact their cycles. They might not be regular because they're stressed. All right.
Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Yin. Okay, so we're talking about periods. We're talking about how it can take a couple of years for your periods to get regular. But you have an interesting concept about not even having periods. Can you talk to us about that?
Yes. So I'm calling it #periods optional. And I came across this because I realized the only reason we're building that lining every single month is to catch an embryo. And if we're not trying to catch an embryo or a baby, on average in the United States is 26 years old is your first baby, or 35 for those of us who had to go through a lot of school or took a while to find our significant other, right?
Yes.
That is 12 to 26, 14 years, or 12 to 35, 23 years of building, bleeding. And every time you build that lining, it could have a mutation, and that would be called endometrial cancer, cancer of the lining. And then every time you pop out an egg, we don't know if it's the popping or the healing that puts you at risk for cancer, is a risk for ovarian cancer. And then oddly enough, all of this also relates to colon cancer. And I think what it is when you bleed every month, your colon is around it. It's being influenced by the hormones, but it's also like I call sympathetic colon. And it's like, oh, it's sad for you. And so then it will give you diarrhea or will give you constipation. 30% of women have some sort of GI nasty when they get their periods. And so if you do that too much, then you have an increased risk of ovarian, endometrial, and colorectal cancer. And so I realized the only reason we need to build this is catch an embryo. So if you're not trying to get pregnant, you don't need to bleed every single month. And if we can go to the next slide, I think it'll go over the research of Dr. Beverly Strassman. And I think it has the Dogon tribe.
So periods optional, okay? I think this is the Pandia Health. So I just want to stop there because, I'm old school. I was raised old school, and, every month you're supposed to have a period. So now you're blowing my mind, and I'm sure you're blowing a lot of people's minds out there by saying, we don't have to have a period? You mean all this time for these last, 30 plus years I've been suffering having a period, and we don't necessarily need to have a period. Are there any potential risk to not having your periods every single month?
Yeah, so to understand what's natural and what's unnatural is Dr. Beverly Strassman studied the Dogon tribe in Africa, Mali, Africa, and she didn't study like 100 years ago. This was like recently. And there, they get their periods at age 16. Here, we get our periods at 12. There, they have 8 babies. Here, we have 2 babies. There, they breastfeed for 12 months to 18 months. Here, we breastfeed for 0, 3, or 6 months. And there, the kicker, they get 100 periods in their lives. We're having 350 to 400 periods. So we're having 3.5 to 4 times the amount of what would be, quote, natural. And so when you think about it, unfortunately, the Dogon tribe is often pregnant, the women, those with uteri, or they're breastfeeding. And I ask you, how many periods do you have when you're pregnant? Zero. How many periods do you have when you're exclusively breastfeeding every 2 to 3 hours? Zero. And so that was the one benefit of being pregnant is not having to bleed. Absolutely. And I love that. And the other flip side of menopause, right, is not having to bleed. And so that's what I want people to understand is that over here, we're incessantly bleeding. And over here, pregnant or breastfeeding. And I'm not saying we should go that way, but I'm saying this is more natural. And so another question is, do I need to bleed every month? And there are no toxins that are building up that you have to get out with your period. It's just that building of the lining. But we now have the technology with the IUD with hormone, the implant, the shot, the patch, the pill, the ring, any of those methods where you don't build up to a level of 10 is the way I think of it, to catch an embryo and grow it for 9 months, but you just grow it to a level of 1 or 2. And then you can choose to bleed every month, every 3 months, every 6 months, or never. As long as you take the medication or use the method, you don't need to bleed until you want to have a baby. When you want to have a baby, let's build that rich lining. Let's catch that embryo, have that baby.
Now, what about, speaking of having babies, like what about the fertility? Does it impact your ability to have a baby if you don't have periods? Let's say you don't have a period for 3 months or 6 months. Then you decide, hey, I want to go ahead and have a baby. So you stop using, the method that's making you stop bleeding. Are there any studies or any information you have that says, how does that impact my ability to then have a child?
Yeah. So what the birth control pill, patch, or ring does is it kind of mimics the pregnancy state in that it tells your body, don't pop out an egg, don't be growing and, up and down with this lining. And so just as women can have serial babies, there are times where they're not bleeding at all, which is pregnant and breastfeeding. And then when the breastfeeding stops, it comes back. So with any of these methods, IUD, implant, shot, pill, patch, ring, I think of them as hormonal treatment to control your periods versus birth control. And all of them are out of your body within 3 days. And so there is no long-term effect on your fertility. If you measure the blood levels and stuff, that's why when you forget to take the pill 3 days in a row, then the hormone level drops and you bleed. And it's out of your body. The only exception is the shot, which sits in your body fat. And so therefore it could be there for like 8 months before it washes out. But all the other methods are out of your body. One question we get a lot is, does birth control make you infertile? My joke is yes, while you're taking it, because that's why you're taking it. But what the real question is, does it make you infertile in the long term? And it does not. And what I want to give an example is polycystic ovarian syndrome. If you take 100 women, put them on the birth control pill, 100 women not on the birth control pill, and then check in 10 years who can get pregnant. 10% of the women not on birth control pills will not be able to get pregnant because 1 in 10 women will get or develop polycystic ovarian syndrome in their life. And then 10% of the women coming off the pill won't be able to get pregnant, but it's not because of the pill. It's because they got polycystic ovarian syndrome during the time that they were on the pill. And the crazy part is I was giving a talk to a bunch of fertility doctors, and they used the birth control pill to make polycystic ovarian syndrome women fertile. So what that is PCOS, your hormones are whack. And then you go on the pill and you get normal. And when the PCOS woman comes off, that's the most normal she's going to be, and she's going to get weirder and weirder and weirder. So for a PCOS woman, as soon as you come off the birth control, that's when you want to get pregnant.
All right. So I just want to remind people that we are live with Dr. Sophia Yin on Talking with Dr. Donna. And if you have questions, I want you to go ahead and put them into the comment section. And we're going to try to answer as many questions as possible. I do see some questions here. So let's see if we can answer maybe a couple that we're talking about. So one question is, does suppressing your period, you sort of just answered this, but maybe talk a little bit more about the hormones. Does suppressing your period affect your hormones either positively or negatively?
Yeah, this is a great opportunity to discuss that. I don't recommend, if you're on a birth control pill, to be less than 30 micrograms of estrogen. So some people go to their doctor and like, I want the lowest hormones possible. But if you're less than 30 micrograms of estrogen and you're under the age of 30, that's not good for your bone mineral density. And that's what the gynecologist, endocrinologists, and adolescent medicine specialists at Stanford say. Once you're above 30, you can be on whatever level hormone estrogen you want. But if you're below 30, go for the 30 microgram of estrogen or higher. Don't go for the low estrin or the low cyclin or anything with the word low in it, because it's probably not good for your bones if you're under the age of 30. And then when you come off of it, again, all of this stuff is out of your body within 3 to 7 days.
Great. All right, so now I have a question from someone who is finished having children.
Yay!
So definitely doesn't need that lining anymore. And but pre or perimenopausal, how does that impact this whole concept of not having cycles when you're perimenopausal? So you're haven't quite kicked into menopause yet. How does that impact menopause, or does it?
Yeah, so I actually think that people that are on the birth control pill patch ring going into menopause have a better menopause experience than people who just let it happen naturally. And now that I've started to share with my friends who are all around that menopausal age, they were fine. And then as they got closer to menopause, things started going crazy and a little whack. And I was like, rather than having random blood and bleeding like stink, and just like, I'm a control freak. And so I like to be in control. And so if you're on the birth control pill, patch, or ring, you can control how often and when you bleed. And it's what you can do if you're perimenopausal is just every 6 months come off and be like, am I there yet? Is it over yet? Is it done? Rather than I think of it like a car running out of gas. It could like sputter, or it could also and so I'd rather not sputter. I'd rather just stay smooth and then check every 6 months. So if you are done with having children, I would totally recommend the IUD with hormone. 30% to 50% of women that go on that lose their periods. And then the flip side, 50 to 70% get lighter. But if you're a control freak like me, I haven't bled in the past 11 years as long as I take my medication. And it's amazing. It's pseudo menopause without hot flashes or any bad things like that. It's just no bleeding.
Wow. So a word of caution, I'm laughing here because in the studio we have men. And they're getting an education in part of women's health. So you've mentioned pill, patch, ring a couple of times. Can you just break that down a little bit more? What do you mean by the pill? What do you mean by the patch? And what do you mean by the ring?
Yes. So when I'm talking about the pill, the birth control pill, and I think it's really important for people to know, if you tried one birth control pill and you didn't like it, there are 39 other ones. But more importantly, there's 8 different progesterones. So if you tried a pill, usually it's a progesterone that's that side effect you don't like. So know it, tell it to your doctor and be like, this is not the one. But know that you have 7 other ones that you can try. The patch is the birth control patch, but if you're menopausal, you can use a different patch, but you can just use the birth control patch. We usually don't recommend the birth control patch because it's actually a higher hormone level. I like to think of it as like a 50 microgram pill when most pills are like 30 micrograms, even though it says 35, 30 on the patch. Because of the way it's delivered, it's equal to a 50 microgram pill. And then lastly is the vaginal ring. There are now 2 vaginal rings for birth control. One is every single month, and then the other one is once a year. And I was really excited about the once a year, but then they were like, ooh, we have the lowest hormones possible. And I was like, oh, did you check people's bone density? And they did it, because all they were concerned about was preventing unplanned pregnancy, which it does. But I'm an adolescent medicine specialist. I have 2 young daughters. I want to make sure their bones are as strong as they possibly could be. And for Latinas, Asians, and Blacks, we sometimes aren't so good on the milk because of lactose intolerance. So do not go on the Anovaria, I would say, until you're 30 years old, again, because you're trying to maintain your bone density.
All right, great. So I think you just answered the question about are there any side effects in particular from the patch if you're perimenopausal?
Yeah, so I would say that there aren't any particular side effects with the patch. Being perimenopausal, it'd just be the same as any other birth control pill. And I would say 95% of women do great on most birth control pills. But one thing I do want to share with you all is I realized as a woman of color and just an activist for the best possible women's health and writing 2,000 birth control prescriptions in the past 2 years and looking at the side effects, And we asked our patients at Pandia Health to self-report their ethnicity so we can look at the research, is that most of medicine is built on the Caucasian model. In medicine, we were taught 70-kilo white male is your standard patient. And I don't know what the kilo standard Caucasian female is, probably what birth control was built on. And so I was always taught to start with norgestimate as the progesterone. And I personally tried norgestimate so many times, but every time I tried it, it didn't work for me. And I had to go through a personal journey of 3 different birth controls until I finally found the one that I wanted. And that's because I was dedicated. And I can't say that everybody else stick to it as much as I did, but I really needed the birth control. And so I just want to share with you all that if you're a person of color or anybody, desogestrel is a good progesterone. It has worked for Asians, Blacks, Latinas that we put people on. And so the only people I put on norgestimate that come to Pandia Health are if they're Caucasian and they don't want to skip their period. But everybody else I put on desogestrel and they do really well.
Awesome. All right. More questions from those who are watching. Is there any weight gain or anything like that with any of the birth control methods that you've talked about?
That is a great question. So the research has shown if you put 100 women on the birth control pill, 100 women not on the birth control pill, the 100 women on the birth control pill on average weigh 1 pound less. So it's not weight gain, but actually just 1 pound, though. Not 1 pound every week, every month, but just 1 pound. Because when you're not on the birth control, you're bloating up, you're bloating down. You're bloating up, you're bloating down. Here, you're just smooth. But certainly each woman responds differently to different progesterones. And there are some progesterones that I call more manly with more androgenic side effects. So levonorgestrel, norethindrone, these are the more old school progesterones. And so some people might notice more munchies on that. But out of all the methods, the pill, the patch, the ring, the shot, the implant, and the IUD, the shot is the one to watch out for. That one is famous for giving you the munchies. So it doesn't like make you gain weight, but it gives you the munchies. And so it's all how you deal with the munchies. If you're like me and you like love dessert and french fries and soda and pearl tea, then you will gain weight with the shot. If you're an anorexic, you won't gain weight, but the side effect of the shot is bad for your bone density. So in general, I don't like the shot, but the shot is better than pregnant. Because if you're pregnant, the baby and the embryo will suck off all your bone density. So.
All right. So we did the pill, the patch. We just talked about the shot. What about the ring? I just want to have you touch on the ring as well.
Yes. So the vaginal ring, there's 2 vaginal rings. There's a every month ring, and then there's a once a year ring. I don't like the once a year because it's only 13 micrograms of estrogen, whereas we recommend 30 micrograms of estrogen if you're under the age of 30. But once you're above 30, you can do whatever you want. For the monthly ring, I actually really recommended that before the IUD with hormone came around. Now, all the physicians that are family planning experts that have uteruses are going the way of the IUD with hormone. But again, for the control freaks, the IUD with hormone only has 30% to 50% chance of having no periods, whereas the Nuva ring, because it has estrogen in it, has a better rate of achieving no periods. And the Nuva ring actually has 35 days of medicine in it. So you could just change it once a month because no month has greater than 35 days. So I think it's a great option for making your hashtag periods optional.
Awesome. All right. So we have a question about, you talked about the normal age for starting a period is about 12. And we know that that's different from different ethnicities. But let's just talk about what happens, what if a child starts having a cycle and they're 10 or 9? Does that mean something's wrong? What does that mean?
We do call that sometimes precocious puberty, and it depends on the endocrinologist and who I would recommend you see if they want to do something and hold off for another 2 years. I would say that if it starts at 10, the main risk is losing some height. Because once you get your period, you have 2 more years of growth and on average, like 2 inches more to grow. And so that too applies to periods optional. I would not consider turning off your young person's periods until 2 years after they got their period. Particularly, I have short little Asian daughters, and I want them to be as tall as possible. But if they're missing school, or if they're missing work, or if they're suffering at home and ibuprofen doesn't cut it for them, then it's worth losing 2 inches so they can go to school and get educated. The number one cause of missed school and work under the age of 25 is bad, evil periods. So if your young person has bad, evil periods, please see a provider. And the first treatment we'll give is ibuprofen, 400 to 600 milligrams, 3 times a day with food for up to 5 days as soon as the period starts. And that'll cut down the blood by 30%. If that doesn't work, then we need to talk pill, patch, ring, IUD, implant, or something like that. And so if your daughter is missing any school, please see a physician.
That's so important. Thank you for saying that. I think it's also important that when we look at ages that are starting periods a little bit younger, we also want to think about the social, psychosocial development of that child. If you're 9 or 10 and you're starting your period, no one else in your school is starting a period, like how that impacts them socially and emotionally. So you want to have that conversation with your pediatrician to talk about the impacts of starting a cycle for that 9 or 10-year-old who starts early. So it sounds like you would not recommend these for girls under 18. I think that she means birth control pills. I'm not quite sure which method, but is there any method that you would not recommend for girls under the age of 18?
So as I mentioned, any of these methods you can use as soon as you start bleeding, and therefore at risk for pregnancy, but also the suckiness of bleeding. But to maximize your height, I would recommend 2 years after that young person's first period, which on average in the United States would be 12 is first period, plus or minus 6 months, depending on ethnicity and body mass index. Generally, 100 pounds is when most people crack their first period, or 22% body fat. And so then plus 2 years would be 14 and a half. So absolutely fine under the age of 18. And I'm going to give it as an option to my daughter. She got her first period 12 and a half. And so we're like months until 14 and a half, but it's her choice. But my joke is my daughter's going to crush your daughter on the SAT, the basketball games, and your daughter's like, oh, bleeding. And my daughter's like, what? What's blood?
Oh, you're hilarious. I love that. Let's talk a little bit, since we were talking about birth control. I think it's so great that you started a company called Pandia Health. Tell us about Pandia Health and what it is that Pandia Health does.
Great. If you could pull up the Pandia Health slide, that would be great.
Yes.
Pandia Health, thank you, is the only women-founded, women-led, doctor-led company in birth control delivery. And I started it because I was going to talk to a bunch of doctors. What is one of the top reasons why women don't take their birth control? And it's because they didn't have it in their hand. They didn't have time to run to the evil pharmacy, not the pharmacy, it's actually an insurance company, run to the pharmacy every single month during that 1 week that they allow you to go get your birth control. Because if you go 8 days ahead, so most of us run out on Sunday, and if we go Saturday, Sunday ahead of time, they're like, you have to come back tomorrow, else you're gonna pay out of pocket. It's like, but I have insurance, and I have school, and I have work, and I have children, I have so many things, and I'm here now. Please give me my birth control. And the insurance is like, sorry, lady, suck it up. And so I started this company so that set it and forget it, let Pandia worry, so you don't have to. And so we want to, work with your insurance company and figure out, can we get it 7 days ahead? Can we get it 10 days ahead? And just go to our website, pandiahealth.com, Pandia, and pan is every, dia is the day. So we have you covered every single day. And with each package comes a freebie or a goodie. I choose. I just picked up some almond roca, so if you're into that, we're going to be sliding some of that in there. We've also had condoms. We've had tea. We've had some really fancy soap from this company. It's called Soap for Sinners. I didn't name it, but I love the soap, and I'm so thankful they gave us 1,000 free samples. So I just, sent that out there to share with everybody. But these freebies, and then we try to do as much as possible. So if your insurance will allow 3 months at a time, 6 months at a time, years at a time. We take almost all private insurances, and we also take family pack, we take TRICARE. We don't take Kaiser because Kaiser won't let us bill them. They're an evil monopoly, but they're good care. But we can't play with Kaiser. So that's Pandia Health. And we have tons of educational videos on YouTube. So top 5 reasons why your period's late, new to birth control, here Dr. Yen's tips, don't take it first thing in the morning on an empty stomach, information about emergency contraception. And we do a Facebook Live as well every Tuesday at 5 p.m. Pacific and Espanol, and then 5:30.
That's awesome. That is awesome. So we'll make sure to put all of your information below on the YouTube channel so you can get a hold of Pandia Health. You can go on Facebook at 5:30 on Tuesdays and catch information in English, or 5 o'clock in Spanish. So that's excellent. Again, as I opened the show talking about this triple consciousness of also having, being, someone of color, being an American, and also being a woman, that there are so many different factors that we have to pay attention to that our male counterparts don't. And birth control being delivered is phenomenal. So I thank you for your ingenuity and your drive to start this company because it is very much needed. I want to just give you the opportunity, if there's anything else that you want to share regarding your cycles and coronavirus, this is your opportunity.
Thank you. Check out pandiahealth.com/periods optional. And the bottom is my TEDx talk, which pretty much repeats what we talked about today, that you don't need to bleed every single month unless you really enjoy it. And then my PSA, public service announcement, is that check your body mass index. If it's 26 or greater, Planned Parenthood's generics don't work. And that you want to ask your doctor in advance of if you're having heterosexual relations and you want to prevent unplanned pregnancy, for prescription emergency contraception. I don't get paid by this company. I just want to prevent unplanned pregnancy. It's called Ella. And under the Affordable Care Act, thank you, President Obama, and now President Biden, for passing it. Birth control should be available with no copay, no deductible, if you have insurance and your insurer is a religious insurer. So if you are paying anything for your birth control, you can go to the National Women's Law Center. They have a website called coverher.org. And it'll tell you how to fight your insurance, or at least tell them the law, so that you don't have to pay anything for your birth control. And so Pandia Health costs nothing as long as you have insurance. And if your doctor already wrote your prescription, you pay us nothing. If you need a prescription, it's $20 once a year to use our passionate, expert birth control doctors. And we can deliver to all 50 states. So if you're moving around, you got college or stuff like that, and we can prescribe in 9 states, and we're expanding as we get more funding.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Dr. Yen, for being a guest on Talking with Dr. Donna, talking about coronavirus and cycles. That was super educational. And I just want to underscore that if you have more questions, you can leave them in the chat and comment section, and I'll go through them. If I can't answer, I'll have Dr. Yen answer. But also, as I see so many questions in the chat that are pretty specific, make sure you have this conversation with your provider. And if you can't have this conversation with your provider, then you need to change providers, right? Right, Dr. Yen?
I absolutely agree. If you can't talk to your doctor about your health stuff, you need a different doctor.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for tuning into another episode of Talking with Dr. Donna. We had Dr. Sophia Yen, CEO and founder of Pandia Health, with us this evening. I want to remind you, because we are in the midst of a pandemic, continue to wear your mask, continue to social distance, continue to wash your hands frequently, and I encourage you to consider getting the vaccine when it is your turn. Thank you again for keeping your appointment with your doctor. I'll see you next Thursday at 6:30 p.m. Take care. Be safe. If you have a question for Dr. Donna, please do leave it on my page, and I will be happy to answer the question for you.